Putin wanted to win Kyiv in 3 days. The plan was simple. Give the illusion of demilitarizing Ukraine, enter the country sneakily, kill Zelenskyy, appoint a puppet leader, and leave. Now, more than 400 days later, Russia's currency is dying, and the war is far from over. As Moscow continues to fight the haunting Western sanctions, its currency is no match to the dollar or yuan. It's plummeting rapidly, and there's little saving grace. From ruble to rubble, this is the Russian cash crisis. How did you go bankrupt, Joe asks Mike. 2 ways, Mike responds. Gradually, then suddenly. If you know this brilliant quote from Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, congratulations! You've read a great literary masterpiece, and you know exactly how it ends for Putin. Vladimir Putin is a lot of things, but the victor of Ukraine isn't cutting it for him. He started a war that he couldn't win, and people back home are furious. You see, their leader has killed the economy through a single KO. As the Western markets have closed on them, many enterprises are struggling to make money. Their leader had assured them that a win in Kyiv would be a prosperous, but so far, they have lost more than 270,000 soldiers and counting. As soon as Russian forces had entered Ukraine, the European Union, the UK, and the US swiftly organized collective sanctions against the country. That's when the ruble hit a new all-time low, 113 rubles for $1. And the impacts were devastating to say the least. On a very macro level, the purchasing power of the entire Russian mainland diminished quite significantly. All the business transactions became super unaffordable, and people's access to basic amenities simply vanished into thin air. Immediately after, the Western allies announced to cease all transactions to buy the Russian ruble. In the historic nosedive for the currency, it became almost worthless in the international markets. Soon after, Putin was left to strike more and more oil deals to keep the ruble up. And let's just say, he somehow managed to keep the currency stable through inorganic central bank manipulation. But hey, something is better than nothing. Until it all went away. Now the ruble is just rubbles in the global market. And here's why. In early April 2023, the financial crisis in Russia worsened when the ruble fell the lowest against its invincible competitors, the US dollar and the euro. The newest reserved currency competitor in the market, the Chinese Yuan and the Indian Rupee, weren't far behind either. Let's just say the currencies of the trading nations strive to remain on top of the game when it comes to exchange rates, and Russia is failing miserably. And that wasn't always the case. Much to the dismay of the Western allies, the Russian ruble was pretty stable in 2022. Putin knows that he's going to lose business inside and outside Russia, so the central bank had a contingency plan in store. But that was highly dependent on a quick and decisive war in Ukraine. Alright, that went south for the Russian forces as more and more help from NATO keeps making its way to Kyiv. Even then, for the most part of 2022, $1 was being sold for 50 rubles. For a war-torn country that's under the line of fire through sanctions, that's not awful. In fact, in 2022, the Russian ruble was one of the strongest performing currencies in the world. While its troops were storming Ukraine, it reached its all-time high value in March 2022. What you don't know is that stability Putin kept flexing about, it was just an artificial and short-lived sham. The Russian central bank was buying its own currency because no one else would. Now, as the economy plummets, buying your own currency is proving to be a hefty process. In the markets, you'll have to spend 83 rubles to get a US dollar. Congratulations, Vladimir Putin. This is exactly how you kill a currency. The way Russian currency keeps deteriorating in the market, it seems like it'll come close to its all-time low value when it had first attacked Ukraine on February 24th in 2022. So, what went down? Ah, yes. In the game of war and dipping currency, no ploys are complete without the politics of oil. And in Russia's case, its gas reserves add much-needed flair to its economy. Only when it's not in shambles, of course. When the Russian troops stormed Ukraine, Putin was convinced that his economy wouldn't die. Not entirely, at least. It has the greatest commodity as its natural reserves that even its worst enemies can't live without. In today's world, oil is king. So even when the war was underway, the European Union and Russia's allies like India and China kept striking oil and gas deals with Moscow. And those deals could have only gone through if the transactions were in Russian rubles. Quite convenient, right? This is the biggest reason why the ruble was quite consistent and stable in early 2022. Sure, it took a huge dip in February 2022, but it recovered quite quickly. But the war started more than a year ago. While Putin still has a lot of oil and gas supply to offer, its biggest customer, Europe, isn't interested in buying. And Russia is only making offers that Europe can refuse. Early on, the US and the EU were plummeting the sales of the ruble. Now, it's plummeting Russia's economy. The principle here is simple. When there's a high demand and low supply, prices rise. And when the demand hits low, prices fall. Something very similar is happening to the ruble. When Putin forced his hand by making sure everyone buys gas and oil in his home currency, he was essentially planning its economic failure. In 2023, the European Union made several decrees that banned the import of Russian oil products and gas. What became the hardest blow on Russia's oil turned out to be the price caps on Moscow's oil. The EU and G7 imposed a $100 per barrel cap on premium to crude products. And for the products that are traded at discount to crude, the price cap was $45 per barrel. Right after this complex set of embargoes, the ruble started to lose its value in the international market and hit its all-time low. Not to mention, most European countries ditched Russian gas to import more and more LNG products. To add fuel to the fire, and we mean that in quite the literal sense, the explosion of the Nord Stream pipeline cut off Russia's access to the European demands. The old continent was struggling with the gas shortages, and the new alternative for LNG was just on the horizon. While many investigations hold the U.S. responsible for the sabotage, Europe doesn't have enough bargaining power to battle it out with their NATO ally. So the explosion of Russia's breadwinning gas pipeline did two things: crushed the Russian ruble under its own weight and brought Moscow to its knees. The new year had barely started and Putin was scuttling deep into the economic crisis. From the east, China and India kept bringing foreign currencies into the country as they kept their demand for oil and gas steady. Yet, that wasn't simply enough to keep up with the rising costs of war, failing agricultural sectors, and bankrupt Russian corporations. And the ruble isn't only losing the war against the dollar. For decades, Russia has found itself secluded from the global arena due to its hostile territorial and war-making policies. For the most part, China has lent a helping hand to its friends in Moscow, while everyone else has refused to. But as Beijing is ambitious, trying to accelerate Yuan to take over the dollar as the major trading currency, it's also beating ruble's value left, right, and center. For instance, before Xi Jinping had kickstarted the decisive currency war, the exchange rate was 8 rubles for 1 Chinese yuan. As China took hold of its economy with rapid opening of its industrial unit, its economy gained some momentum in the market. On the other hand, Russia was struggling under the tightened sanctions, and its currency took a toll. Now for 1 Chinese yuan, you'll have to spend more than 11 rubles. That's some devastating news for Moscow, who has joined China's race to overthrow the dollar as the dominant trading currency. As Iran, Brazil, India, and Saudi Arabia have followed suit, it looks like Putin would have more and more avenues to trade in either yuan or its own currency. If that happens, Russia's plummeting economy would have more markets to sell oil and gas. Only then, it'll be able to manage to fall back on its feet. Do you think Putin's deal with the ruble will continue? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you soon.